All right. Good evening, all. Thank you for joining us here on the Virtual Cantina Network. I am Dave, and I'm just going to be kind of your master of ceremonies this evening and introducing the two gentlemen that you really want to hear talk this evening. I will begin with introducing our host this evening, Mr. Jonathan Notman. Jonathan is in charge of our speaker series, the person who does all the talking, all the convincing, all the coercing, and all the interviewing for us. Mr. Notman, go ahead and why don't you introduce our guest to all of our friends for our finale of this speaker series this evening?
Well, good evening, David, and good evening to our members, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. So this is the finale of our autumn 2021 virtual Cantina speaker series. We've had some wonderful guests over the last several weeks. All of them have been wonderful. And I can't wait to introduce you to this evening's guest. This gentleman has worked in over 40 film credits since 1970 as an American film editor. I want you all to welcome Paul Hirsch. How are you doing this evening, Paul?
Thank you. I feel a lot of pressure after hearing how wonderful all the other guests were. I'm feeling pressured now.
Oh, not at all. I'm sure you will be absolutely wonderful.
I have to live up to.
Yeah, the reputation that you have to live up to. Anyway, Paul really doesn't need any introduction. I know a lot of our members know a lot about Paul's work, particularly on the Star Wars movies. But for those of you that aren't so familiar with Paul's work outside of the Star Wars kind of universe, just want to kind of run through a little summary of Paul's career and his work to date. So, as I mentioned, Paul is an American film editor with over 40 film credits since 1970. Paul is best known as one of the premier filmmakers to come out of the new Hollywood movement. He's collaborated with directors like Brian De Palma, George Lucas, George A. Romero, Herbert Ross, John Hughes, Joe Schumacher, and many others. In 1978, I don't know if you know this, but Paul won an Academy Award and a Saturn Award for his work on the original Star Wars movie, which he shared with Richard Chew and Marshall Lucas. He was the first person to win the Saturn Award for Best Editing twice, first for Star Wars and then Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, which was a movie that he edited later in his career. He's edited over 35 feature films, including The Empire Strikes Back, Star Wars, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Mission Impossible, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, Footloose, Carrie, Falling Down, Phantom of Paradise, Obsession Below, The Secret of My Success, Steel Magnolias. I could go on. The list is endless, and a lot of movies that we've all grown up with and are all very familiar with. And one of the movies that Paul worked on was Ray. Ray received a second Academy nomination in 2005 and the American Cinema Editors Award for Best Edited Feature. In 2019, Paul published his first book. First, I hope there'll be a couple more. Let's see. It's called A Long Time Ago in the Cutting Room Far, Far Away, My 50 Years of Editing Hollywood Hits. The book chronicles Paul's life and career starting out as part of the new Hollywood movement and beyond. Paul, what incredible career. What an incredible experience you've had throughout your life in working with such wonderful creative individuals, directors, writers, cinematographers. You know, I just don't know where to begin to actually talk to you about this stuff, but we'll mainly talk about your book, but what an incredible career you've had. And, I think a lot of us recognize your work and some of the achievements that you've had throughout your life.
Yes, I've been extraordinarily fortunate to be able to meet and work with such talented people. I mean, filmmaking is a team effort, and editors are a little bit like point guards in basketball. You can only get an assist if the player you pass the ball to scores a basket, or in baseball, if you have to get a run batted in, somebody has to be on base in front of you. So our success as editors depends on the success of the people we're working with, and I've been, as I say, I've been extremely lucky in that regard.
That's very true. It's teamwork makes the dream work. So, Paul, this evening, what I'd like to do...
Make that up?
I don't think so.
Oh.
I couldn't get the copyright on that one, trust me. Anyway, so what we would do for the next, just about an hour or so is just to kind of walk through, this is the virtual cantina, just to walk through, your upbringing, your beginnings of your career within film editing, and then through your career, particularly in the Star Wars realm, if you like. So I see it as a trip down memory lane, just to share some anecdotal kind of experiences that you had while working on the movies. So for those of you that don't know, Paul was born and brought up in New York City. He's the son of Joseph Hirsch, who was at the time a renowned painter. And after some time, during his formative years, he moved to Paris. And I know that you speak fluent French, Paul, which we could probably do after this evening's conversation. So as a young man growing up in New York and Paris, I understand that you loved going to the movies. What were some of your early influences and inspirations in movies that you saw when you were growing up?
Well, as a child in Paris, I used to like to go to American movies. And, the French have this passion for American films. And they, I don't know if it was quite to the extent that it became later when I was a kid, but they always had Hollywood movies playing in Paris, and they would play them in the original version, which meant in English with subtitles. So I would go to American films, and it was sort of my way of keeping touch with my home country. And I remember seeing two films in particular made a deep impression on me. One was An American in Paris with Gene Kelly, in which he played a painter. My father was a painter. And in the film, Gene falls in love with a dancer, and my mother was a dancer. And I was the American in Paris. So I think I must have seen that picture about 20 times. And then there was another film called King Solomon's Mines, which I discovered later had won the Academy Award for film editing. But what really attracted me to the film, first of all, it feels very authentic. I'm not sure where it was shot, but the entire soundtrack is made up of African music recorded in Africa, of course. So it has a very authentic feel, and it's a great story, of traveling across deserts, through jungles, and facing all sorts of terrors, and finally finding the pot of gold at the end of the story. But I remember those two in particular. And then there were, I used to like sort of, costume films. I remember seeing Ivanhoe,
Mm-hmm.
and with Robert Taylor and Elizabeth Taylor, I believe, the two Taylors.
That's right.
And then what else? Then, of course, I saw some French films. There was a film starring Gérard Philippe called Fanfan la Tulipe, which was very popular. It was sort of a swashbuckler kind of film. And so, yeah, the movies were always the most exciting thing to me. I mean, especially ones that involved music, because my really first love, my real love is for music. Although I'm not really a musician. I played the drums in school. I went to the High School of Music and Art in New York, which is a specialized school. You have to take a test to get in. I had to audition and prove that I could read music, which I could barely. And so I'm not a great musician, but I'm a passionate music lover. And a lot of my career in film, I've discovered that the editor has a very strong hand in choosing music for the sequence, for the films that I work on. So it's been very, satisfying in that regard to be able to use my musical sensibility in something that's not, it doesn't require me to actually perform, because I can't do it. But editing is a lot like drumming. It's, we're the drummer in the band, and we keep the pace going, and we keep the rhythm steady, and we speed up when necessary, slow down when we have to, and it's very much related. The two disciplines are very much related.
Right, and I can see the direct comparisons between your father and your mother, and the movies that you saw, and and talking about I think in your book you mentioned, like, when you see movies, it was escapism. You would just go into the movies and just disappear into your own subconscious and just be part of what was going on in front of you. And
Yeah,
as a child, I can remember feeling the same way.
yeah. What's great about the movies is that they can take you away to a different time, a different place, and transport you to wherever. It's the most exciting medium of the 20th century, at least. I'm not a gamer, and I'm only sort of dimly aware of what's going on in the interactive world, which I can see by uh, the numbers of young people who are attracted to that. Must be, uh, you know, intensely engaging. But for my generation, it was the movies.
Absolutely. Same here. You know, growing up a lot with the Disney movies and just being captivated by that. And I work in education. I think a lot of my formative, years in watching movies just kind of drew me into that particular career. But anyway, so um, moving on to the next question. So, what I understand you mentioned, what you studied back in New York with school, and I understand you studied art history at Columbia University.
Yeah,
And shortly after, I think your first job was working in the shipping department at Dynamic Films.
that's
And by
right.
chance, you became involved in trailer editing. Tell us how that started. How did you go from working in shipping in Dynamic Films to trailer editing?
Well, a friend of mine's uncle owned Dynamic Films, and I had started out as an architecture student. When I graduated Columbia, I applied to and was accepted in the Columbia School of Architecture, and I started there in the fall of 1966. And within a couple of months, I realized that this was not for me. It was much too dry, and I was facing 4 years to get yet another bachelor's degree, and I just was not prepared mentally for that particular journey. And in the meantime, I had visited a friend who had editing equipment, and I was fascinated by the tools of the trade, in particular the moviola, because in that era, the only way you could see a moving image was to go to the movies or turn on a television. There were no videotape recorders yet, and there was no such thing as pause or rewind or fast forward. It was all coming at you at sound speed, and you had no control over it. But here was this tool that would let you stop on a frame. The great thing about film is that it's a series of little photographs, thousands of little photographs, and with the moviola you could stop and look at each frame as a still photograph. So that really excited me and intrigued me. And I had no idea what editing was, but I decided I wanted to learn about it. And this friend of mine, his uncle, had this company, and they hired me as a gopher. Go for this, go for that. And I was delivering packages. I would take the work prints from the editors at the office, take them to the negative cutter, and then I would pick up the cut negative from the negative cutter and take it to the lab. And then I would pick up the prints from the lab and take them back to the office, mount them on reels, put them in boxes, and ship them out. So in my first 2 weeks doing this job, um, I met a negative cutter who was looking to hire a trainee. And it was an entry-level job. You didn't have to know anything. And I asked one of the editors at the office, did he think it was a good idea? And he said, well, you'll be handling film instead of packages. So I thought, well, that makes a lot of sense. So after 2 weeks, I gave 2 weeks notice. And a month after starting in the business, I went to work as an assistant to a negative cutter whose name was Seymour Smilowitz. And Seymour was he was a screamer. Whenever he got frustrated, he would yell at his employee or two. There was a woman I was working with and me. It was just the two of us. And he would yell at us when he got frustrated. So anyway, the job was interesting to me because I was learning all about the technical end of the business and how you prepare film for printing. And as long as I was learning, it was interesting. It's a very demanding job in that you have to focus intensely on something that's extremely boring. So even though it's boring, you have to pay strict attention because you can't make a mistake. So after I guess about 6 months, I felt I'd learned everything I could from Seymour, and he yelled at me once too many times, and I said I quit, and I walked out. Meanwhile, my mother had, by chance, met a young man who was working as a trailer editor and was looking for an assistant editor. And she said, "Oh, my son's an assistant editor." I was not. But she said, "Oh, my son's an assistant editor." And she sent me to see him, and he hired me. And so I knew enough to pass myself off as an assistant to this guy. And we were working at a company that was doing trailers and TV spots and radio spots for MGM and United Artists. And they got very busy, and there was more work for the editor than he could handle. So he started passing little jobs off to me. The first thing I cut was they had a 10-minute featurette on the making of the Thomas Crown Affair with Steve McQueen and Faye Dunaway. And they needed a 3.5-minute version. They needed to cut down. So they gave that to me. That was the first cut. And then after that, the client liked it, and they gave me another one, which was to do one from scratch, which was about Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And
Great movie.
and I did that one. And then then somehow I started doing trailers as well. I did a trailer for an early Peter Medak movie. I forget the title now. And I did a number of, I started doing trailers. I did a trailer for King Lear, the Paul Scofield version.
Wow.
That was interesting. I don't recall all the pictures that I did, but anyway, around that time, my brother Charles was working at Universal. He had talked his way into a junior executive position, and he was his job was to meet writers and directors in New York who were looking for financing for projects. And I think that because they turned down all his recommendations, I don't think they ever were serious about looking for people. I think they just needed somebody to be the lightning rod, where they could say, "Oh, you want financing? Go talk to Hirsch. You know, he'll take care of you." And they never greenlit anything that he recommended. So one of the directors who had come to him with an idea was Brian De Palma. So he and Brian wrote a screenplay loosely based on Godard's Masculine Feminine. It was about young people in New York. And in particular, it was 3 guys who had been drafted by the Selective Service to serve, and this was, 1968, the height of the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
So the film was called Greetings. Greetings is the salutation in every draftee letter. You always, if you get a letter in the mail in those days and it said greetings, you knew you were going up to the draft board. So it was called Greetings, and one of the 3 guys about whom the film was Bobby De Niro. That was one of his earliest pictures. When they finished it, they shot it in 2 weeks during my brother's vacation from Universal. So he had raised independent money to do it. I think he raised $36,000, which in those days was equivalent to, I don't know, it was a very small sum, probably less than 100,000 today. So they needed a trailer for it, and they came to me. That's how I got to meet Brian. And Brian and I just kind of hit it off. He had gone to Columbia a few years before me, so there was a bit of a connection there. And just temperamentally, we just clicked. And I did this trailer for Greetings, and then the picture came out. It was sort of a mild success, and it won the Silver Bear at Berlin. And the releasing company, Sigma 3, decided to give them some money to do a sequel entitled Son of Greetings. And I was hired to be the editor. And during the course of the making of the film, we changed the title to Hi Mom. And that was my first film. I was 23 years old. I knew nothing, but I was armed with the confidence of the deeply ignorant. I thought, yeah, I can do that. I can cut a feature, no problem.
Say yes and ask questions later.
Well, I really was confident. I
Yeah.
thought, yeah, I can do that, but I didn't know how much I didn't know. So
Yeah, I remember those years.
that's how I got started.
So you basically cut a trailer for the movie Greetings for Brian, and then you went on to edit 5 movies. As you mentioned, Hi Mom,
Yeah.
Sisters, Phantom of the Paradise, which I've seen, is a wonderful movie, Obsession, and then of course Carrie. Everybody knows Carrie. I remember growing up seeing Carrie. You terrified me. You absolutely terrified me with that movie.
Yeah.
But what a
Carrie was our first bona fide hit.
yeah. Absolutely wonderful movie. And, people still talk about that movie to the day. At the time, I think it was one of those movies that was released that was just, everybody was like talking about it. You have to see it. The ending is just an incredible movie. And it still holds up today as one of the greatest horror movies, I think, of all time. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But
I saw it recently. I guess, let me see when it was. It was a few years ago. I guess it was the 40th anniversary. It must have been 2016. Yeah, the 40th anniversary. And I was struck by how simple and clear the picture is. It's very straightforward. These girls torment Carrie, and the gym teacher punishes the class. And one of the girls feels so guilty that she asks her boyfriend to take Carrie to the prom, and another of the girls is so angry that she decides to play a prank on her. And basically that's the story. And so it's very simple, it's very clear, and there's not a lot of fat on it. It's a good length. I find a lot of movies today just go on and on and on.
Yeah, it's well written. It's to the point, and it leaves a mark on you. I think whichever way you look at the movie. But so just as I mentioned, you edited 5 movies after the cutting a trailer for Greetings, Hi Mom, Sisters, Phantom of the Paradise, Obsession, and Carrie. Now, I know I've done my research that Phantom of the Paradise changed your life. So, question for you: at an after party of the screening of Phantom of the Paradise, you met someone who would lead you to edit other movies. Tell us a little bit about that chance meeting.
Yeah, so Phantom of the Paradise was an independent production that was picked up as a negative pickup deal by 20th Century Fox. And they had a screening on the lot in Los Angeles. And I was still living in New York at the time. And Brian called me and he said, "You got to get out here. We're having a screening this weekend and they're throwing a party afterwards. And the excitement is amazing. You got to be here, So I had just gotten married, and my wife and I jumped on a plane. We came out for the weekend, and after the film, we went to this after party, and this young woman there came up to me, and she said, "Oh, you're the editor?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Oh, come with me. My husband wants to meet you. I'm Marshall Lucas, by the way." So she grabbed me by the hand, and she pulled me through this mob of people and took me over to George. And George, was sort of a hero to my generation because he had directed THX, but more importantly was American Graffiti, which was so much about my generation. He and I are 18 months apart, and the tagline for American Graffiti was "Where were you in '62?" And I graduated high school in '62, so this was, I was the perfect audience for that movie. And again, I've seen Graffiti again recently, and it's a wonderful movie. It's really, I don't know how often you've seen it, but it's really so human and touching. And I once asked George, I said, "Which of the characters was you?" And he said, "Well, actually, I was all the characters. I was Terry the Toad when I was a freshman. I was the Ron Howard character when I was a sophomore. I was the I forget the actor's name, the hot rod driver, Paul Matt. And he says I was Paul Matt as a junior, and I was Richard Dreyfuss as a senior. So the picture is sort of is a reflection of the changes he went through in high school. He was in a very bad car accident his senior year and almost got killed, and gave up the idea of racing cars and decided to make movies instead. I can't hear you.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. Sorry. Growing up in the UK, I think I first saw that in the early 80s. And not that I could directly relate to it living in the UK, but I understood it was all about growing up in a small town in America and the experiences of, growing up from a juvenile, being a teenager into your 20s and your experiences. So, and they say, a lot of directors with their first movies write from experience about something that has happened in their lives that, they have firsthand experience of. So, yeah, I was an amazing chance meeting, at the after party for that particular movie that went on to almost change your life in a way. So moving on from that, I understand that at the time, I think Brian and George did a joint casting call in Los Angeles for both for Carrie and the original Star Wars movie. And I understand that after a conversation you had with Brian, George Lucas called you shortly afterwards. Can you tell us a little bit about that conversation? Why did George call you?
Well, I don't really know. I mean, it was Brian who called me, and he said George wants to speak to you. And I had this image of Brian with his arm around George's neck, dragging him to the phone to speak to me. Brian was a real champion for me, and I owe him everything, really. My brother gets upset if I don't mention that I met Brian through him, so I have my brother to thank for meeting Brian, but Brian was really my mentor for many years and encouraged me and empowered me and generally, advocated for me. And anyway, George said, I'm doing this picture. I already have an editor for it, but I'm going to do another one after that, and I'd really like to work with you someday. And I said, great, and I went home and I said to my wife, George said he wants to work with me someday. I sort of wish it was the picture he's doing now, but I guess that's not possible because I was about to start on Carrie. Mm. So, yeah, and, I didn't think it was going to happen. And sometime later, when I was already cutting Carrie, they shot Carrie out in Los Angeles. I was still living in New York, so we were working on opposite ends of the continent at that point. And while I was working on Carrie, I went to dinner at the home of Jay Cox, who was married to an actress named Verna Bloom. Jay was
movie critic,
and then he became a screenwriter. And he was a friend of George. He'd been over to England and visited the set, and he came back with a book of production stills. And I looked through the stills, and it was just astounding. There was, shots of the R2 and the 3PO and the Jawas and the Sandcrawler and the Stormtroopers and Darth Vader and some of the other droids. And it was just, so fantastic. I went home and I said, I know George wants to work with me someday, but I really wish it could have been this one. Boy, this one looks great. And even the title in those days, Star Wars, the most far out and imaginative science fiction film ever made at that point was 2001, where the destination was Jupiter.
That's right.
Now, here's a title that was talking about Star Wars. It's like much further and deeper into space than just our own solar system, So anyway, Brian and I, finished. We were working on Carrie through the first 6 months of 1976. George was shooting in England and North Africa, and at the end of principal photography, he and Marcia came through New York and told us they had let their editor go. They were not happy with the cut that he had delivered, and they didn't get along with the guy particularly well, and he wasn't really uh, enthusiastic about the project, and they had already hired Richard Chu out in California
Mhm.
um, to work on the film, and anyway, we showed them a cut of Carrie. It essentially was the final cut of Carrie.
Right.
And a couple of weeks later, I got a phone call from Marcia. She said, "We need help. We're never going to finish in time if we don't get more help. Can you come out and work on the film?"
Mhm.
And so that's how that happened.
So he was setting you up, I think, for the initial conversation to probably edit on the second movie, which was Empire Strikes Back. But in a way, good for you, bad for the other editor that you recognized your talent and said, we'd like to get you involved with the final edit of the original Star Wars movie, which you really wanted to work on. So it worked out perfectly.
Yeah, it was amazing. And I think really Marcia had a big hand in my being hired.
Yeah. She obviously had heard about you, spotted your talent, and as all great wives do, they're behind us men, and they kind of come and meet somebody that I think you'd like to meet, and the rest is history. So moving on from that, so you Richard Chew and yourself were tasked with editing the original Star Wars movie. So tell me a little bit about some of the obviously you're working with somebody else's work, the gentleman that you said that was let go, the previous editor. So what were some of the challenges and inspirations for that cut? What would it like to edit a movie that you previously had no involvement with, fixing somebody else's work in a way?
Yeah. So, on any movie, once you have a first cut, and, on movies that I assemble myself, I put in everything so that I know what I'm dealing with. So I have in front of me everything that's available. And the first cut, which they call the editor's cut sometimes, is not really the cut that the editor would prefer. It's just the most sensible starting point in editing the movie. You need to see everything you've got in order to make intelligent decisions about what to take out or move around or whatever. So, the mental process that's going on when you're looking at a film at that point is, what's wrong with this picture? What's wrong with this picture? And it's like those games in the newspaper where they'd say, they'd have a little picture and they'd say, what's wrong with this picture? And you say, well, the cow has 5 legs, and the car is on top of the house, or, the dog has 2 heads or whatever, and you're supposed to find the things that are wrong. And that's what you're doing when you're watching a film at this point. You say, you're leaving yourself sensitive to, is this taking too long? Is this going too fast? Is this in the right place? And so you're looking for things that are wrong. Well, when somebody else has put the picture together and you're looking at it, the things that are wrong come at you fast and furious because you haven't been involved in any of the choices. So you think, oh, that's not good, And so there was a lot of trying to unwind. Some of the scenes were overcut. Some of the scenes dragged because he hadn't cut enough. There didn't seem to be any particular rhyme or reason to what he was doing. There was no editing style that I could make out, and editing, as I said before, is very much related to music and or drumming in particular. And this guy was really always off the beat somehow. So I was making corrections to cuts, sometimes just 2 or 3 frames, just to catch the right moment, so it didn't seem awkward, just to pick up the the tempo, keep the beat going. And I had an assistant on the picture who would come. We would cut the film, and if we had a little trim, we'd hang it up on a hook in a bin. And usually, you taking out pieces of film, 1.5 feet is a second. So I was taking out 2 and 3 frames at a time just to sharpen the rhythms. And this guy came in. He saw my bin filled with these little trims, and he said, "What did you do? Put the film through a fan? What's going on here?" So But yeah, I mean, it would have been a lot easier. I find, later on, looking back, it's a lot easier to cut the film yourself in the first place, and not
Yeah,
have to be fixing a lot of
yeah,
inept choices. I hesitate to say that because the editor in question had done some really good work in the past. I guess I don't know what was going on with him at that time, but it was,
yeah,
so that was it for me. I was constantly playing what's wrong with this picture and how do I fix it. Uh,
yeah. That's a challenge. That's a challenge. But you, Richard, you and Marsha, famously and historically worked on it, and the movie was released, as we all know, in May 1977. Huge hit. I can remember that time struggling to get to see that movie. I think it was easier to see Empire at the time because it was on a bigger release. But and subsequently, your work, that challenge of trying to make this, edit right and trying to make it exactly what George and the writers had envisaged, was a huge challenge for you. But in 1978, I want to talk about that gentleman just to the right of you. 1978, you were nominated for an Academy Award, all three of you, for Best Film Editing for Star Wars. And you, Richard, Marsha, you won it. You won the Best Film Editing nomination. And I see him. I think, is that him over to your right in the cabinet behind you?
he's lurking in the shadows.
What a moment that was like. What was that experience like? And I know I think you were nominated to give this speech on behalf of all three of you. So what was that experience like? Talking to, what is it, 400 million that watch the Oscars every year? What was that experience like for you as an individual? You were a very young man at the time.
Yeah, I've looked at videos of me giving my speech, and I realized that I had trouble. I was having trouble breathing. Uh, yeah, it was terrifying, And I told George before the show, I said, in a way, I hope I don't win. I don't want to have to give a speech. He said, well, look at it this way. You have, 30 seconds of terror, and then you get to keep the statue for the rest of your life. So I thought, well, that's a good trade-off, So the reason I spoke was that, as it turned out, it was a producer's decision to put my credit first on the film because, as it turned out, I worked on the film for more months than any of the other editors. I was the fourth editor hired, but I just got distracted by a change on the screen. Excuse me.
That's an image of you receiving your Academy Award from Farrah Fawcett.
Yeah. What was really exciting to me was getting it from Marcello Mastroianni, who was the other presenter.
Right.
But Farrah was a very attractive young woman. Anyway, I was chosen to be first in the credits because I had put in more time than anyone else, and also I was the only editor on the film for the last 5 months. So again, it was not my decision. I wasn't consulted. I wasn't asked. But the Gary Kurtz decided to put my name first, and so we decided. During the commercials, the announcer would come on in the auditorium and he would say, if you're multiple nominees, choose a spokesman, and only one person can speak. And I got together with Marsha and Richard, and I said, screw that. We're all going to talk, I'll talk first. And then Marsha, Marsha was listed second. So I gave my speech and I turned to Marsha and she started walking off. And Richard followed her and the band started playing and that was it. So we got in the wings and I said, what happened? I thought so Marsha said, well, just as I was getting up, George said to me, don't thank me. And you had thanked everyone else on the picture. So I thought I don't really have anything to add. And Richard said, well, I saw Marsha wasn't going to speak, so I didn't, so that's how that happened. It was spontaneous.
Yeah, probably very nerve-wracking, and but anyway, you did an amazing job, and we were, even looking back now, all those many years ago, it's just immense pride, I'm sure, for what you achieved under very unusual circumstances, I think.
Well,
So,
Jonathan, we have our first question here, if you don't
yeah,
mind me interrupting.
sure.
It goes to this. Our viewer Catherine asked is regarding the editing of Star Wars. It's been said, I think possibly by you, that you would take a reel to edit and Richard would take a reel to edit, and
Yes,
then when you had finished, you would just grab the next reel and go on and on and on.
right.
What she'd like to know was, did you discuss ahead of time the pace and what sort of rhythms you were going for in the editing?
Oh,
Because obviously to us and to this person who has a better eye than the rest of us, I think that it just appears to be completely seamless that both of you were editing on the same wavelength and the same pace.
well, again, um, I came on the picture at the end of September of '76. The three of us worked together for October, November, December to get the picture ready for a screening for the studio. I had been hired through the end of the year, and in the last week of December, Marcia came to me and she said, around that time, um, Marty Scorsese was cutting New York, New York in Los Angeles, and his editor passed away. And he called Marcia, with whom he had worked earlier, and asked her to come on to the picture to help him finish the picture. And Marcia was much more interested in New York, New York, which was a love story between Bob De Niro and Liza Minnelli. It seemed much more the kind of project she was interested in, a character story, not a space fantasy. So George had decided that he wanted to finish the picture with just one editor. He didn't want to keep working with multiple editors at that point. So I thought she was coming to me to say, thank you so much for your help and goodbye and good luck. And instead she said, George wants to finish the picture with one editor and he wants it to be you. Because I thought since Richard had been hired before me that he would be the obvious choice to stay on. But he had been offered the same deal as me, apparently. I didn't know that. So, so I said, yeah, I'd love to. So then during those subsequent months, there was a lot of reshooting going on. We reshot the Cantina sequence. We shot a lot of footage of stormtroopers, not stormtroopers, but Imperial, I don't know what you call them, weapons masters firing pulling levers and pushing faders on video machines, standing in for the Death Star weapon, and then the R2 in the canyon, and there was a lot of stuff. And then so during those subsequent 5 months, January, February through May, I basically had a hand in everything. I mean, I went back and I sort of touched each scene. So the consistency and the continuity you're talking about may have resulted from that, because I did sort of run it through my typewriter, as it were.
Very cool. Thank
Great
you. Thank
story.
you for letting me
All
interrupt.
of all of which was, of course, with George's approval.
Mm.
Of course. So, Paul, moving on, fast forwarding, if you like, to March 1979, right? You had that conversation with George. He obviously, in my opinion, had outlined you to be editor on Empire Strikes Back, as you mentioned, and you were, assigned as principal editor for that movie. And I'll mention your book in a short while, but there's a experience that I read in your book about moving to London, right? You were, I think, given a house in Boreham Wood, which is near Hampstead in London, in March 1979, and you moved there with your wife.
The house was not in Boreham Wood.
Oh, okay.
No, we were living in Hampstead.
Okay, Hampstead. I beg your pardon. Yeah, the studio's in Boreham Wood. That's right.
Right.
So you moved to a house in Hampstead, and I was reading your book, which we'll talk about in a minute. But there's an experience. I think obviously moving from the East Coast out to London, time difference, etc. It's March 1979. You set yourself up, ready to work on this new movie. But you had an unusual 8 a.m. visit. I think on the first morning that you arrived in Hampstead. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, there's a knock on the door at 8 in the morning, which was I guess 3 in the morning for me. And I, bleary-eyed, I go to the door, and there's a woman standing there with a clipboard, and she says, "Inventory check." I said, excuse me? I couldn't understand what she was saying. She said, inventory check. And I said, what are you saying? She says, I'm here to check the inventory. Now, of course, in America, we say inventory. So it took me a while to grasp what she was talking about. So we went in the house, we counted every spoon and fork and, a little tchotchke on the shelves. And, so that was our first experience, inventory check.
Yeah, I remember reading that in the book. I remember thinking, you've flown all that way. You're setting yourself up to work on probably one of the most anticipated movie sequels of all time. And just individuals ringing the doorbell at 8 in the morning asking you to run through the inventory with her. That's an unbelievable experience. It was funny to read that in your book. So anyway.
I was just baffled. I don't know. I don't know what you're saying,
Yeah, absolutely. So then, obviously, you settle in, you have your wife with you, and you get used to the time difference, and you start work at Elstree on The Empire Strikes Back. And so, tell us a little bit about the difference in working or editing, I think, on the original movie to working in London. I mean, what were some of the differences of that experience for you, and what lessons did you learn from the original production to this production?
Well, as I said, I was the fourth editor hired on the first film, so I was nowhere near any of the shooting. And, it can be fun to be around the set. The shooting was so complicated on Empire that they were able to produce only a very limited amount of film every day, to George's great frustration. This film was scheduled for 16 weeks of shooting. They shot 29. And but they would shoot a scene. We were shooting the ice planet at the outset, and there were gun battles in hallways, and they would have to load, the special effects guys would load a little explosive charge in the wall for where later on the animators would put a laser bolt that would hit that spot and it would explode. And every time they did a take, that little spot of explosion would leave a big black mark, so they'd have to repaint it and plant a new charge, and to do a second. So, and then there was a lot of steam, and controlling the amount of steam was tricky. Some of it was too much, too little, and it was a very complicated, a lot of moving parts in every setup. So I found myself able to keep up with camera very easily. And a lot of times I was done cutting everything I had by lunchtime. So I'd go on the set in the afternoon. They'd say, "What are you doing here?" And I'd say, well, "I'm out of film. Can you give me some more film? I need something to cut." And but it was good. I had some good experiences getting to know Carrie and Mark and Harrison a little bit, and yeah, it was.
And here's a great picture of you, Mark, Harrison, and Irving Kirsch, or Kirsch, as you called him, on the set of Echo Base, I think.
My brolly.
And I can see you've got an umbrella there, so you're probably used to London weather at that time.
Yeah, when bald guys have to worry about that kind of thing. We're the first to know when it's raining.
And so, I've again read your book and a lot of your experience of living and working in London at that time. One thing is I picked up on, and I'd love our members to hear this story. While you were working on Empire Strikes Back in London, I understand Gary Kurtz approached you one day. You were just mentioning a minute ago you didn't have a lot of film to edit at that time, but Gary approached you and asked you to cut a trailer for The Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah.
At that time, and what I thought was unusual, you had to hire some help for a voiceover. Tell us about that story and who you coerced into doing a voiceover for the trailer.
Well, I wanted it to be an American voice, and Mark Hamill's wife, Mary Lou, was pregnant at the time, about to give birth, and Mark was under a certain amount of pressure, I guess, because he walked around the studio with a cardboard sign hanging from his neck that said, "Don't ask." I guess people are always saying, "Has the baby come yet? Has the baby come yet?" So he just had this sign on him saying, "Don't ask." So I thought, well, I guess I'll just leave Mark alone. And so I went to Harrison. I said, "Listen, Harrison, I've cut this trailer, and I need someone to do the narration." He says, "Why me?" I said, "Well, I wanted an American voice." He said, "You don't have much choice, do you?" I said, "Not really." So he said, he was reluctant at first. I said, "Come on, it'll just take you half an hour at the end of the day. We'll go to one of the studios. We'll knock it off." So he said he agreed to do it, and I had him play it like a newsboy with an extra edition. Extra, extra, read all about it. Uh, that kind of energy, and actually, that trailer is turned up on the internet. My daughter told me this. I didn't know it. You can actually find it if you search for it, I think. And I wrote a script based on my trailer cutting experience, and had Harrison read it, and I shipped it off. I mixed it with music from the first film and some sound effects, and I shipped it off to California. And I got a phone call from someone there, and they said, "George saw the trailer and he loves it." I said, "Great." And he said, "And we love the actor who did the narration. Who is that?" And I said, "It's Harrison." They said, "Who?" I said, "Harrison Ford. One of the stars of the movie." And so he said, "Well, George wants to use him in the trailer." I said, "Great." So I ran out and I found Harrison. I said, "Harrison, we're a hit." He says, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, George heard the trailer and he loves it. He wants to use your voice in the final version." So he said, "What?" He says, "Hold on a second." He says, people charge a lot of money for this kind of thing. How much are you getting for the trailer?" I said, "Me? I'm not getting anything." So he's, "What?" "No, I just, part of the job, cut a trailer." And he says, "That's not right. That's not right." He says, "I'll tell you what. I'm going to ask for $10,000 and I'm going to give you half."
Wow.
And so I said, "Okay, great." So at that point, uh, Gary came walking over and said, "Harrison, can I talk to you for a second?" And Harrison says, "Sure, Gary." He puts his arm around his shoulder and he walks away and he gives me a wink. And they go off and they talk. And he comes back and he said, "I only had the nerve to ask for five."
Oh,
So a couple of weeks later, I got a check from Harrison Ford Productions for $2,500.
oh, that's great.
Yeah, and
Looking after you, Paul.
it was very nice. It was he didn't have to do it, but it was very generous. And
Yeah,
anyway,
a great story. And so here's a picture of, I don't know if I'm sharing this correctly. Hang on one second.
Gary
Uh,
Kirsch.
Gary, Gary Kirsch. I don't know the gentleman in the glasses. Mark and yourself. Is that a celebration of Kirsch's birthday?
I guess. Let me think who that man is. He's so familiar. I think he's. I think that might be Kelvin Pike.
Got it.
Kelvin was the camera operator.
But you're clearly having a lot of fun on set and enjoying your time with the cast and the director and the producer there.
Yeah, I had more hair in those days.
Grass doesn't grow on a busy street, Paul. So anyway, obviously you spent a lot of time in London, had a great time, working on Empire. And then the serious work starts. You return to California to work on the first cut of Empire Strikes Back, which, I understand reading your book again. You subsequently screened each reel for George, Irving Kershner, Marsha, Gary Kurtz, and Larry Kasdan, who wrote the script. I think it was Lee Brackett had sadly passed away
Yes.
on writing the script for the movie, but then Larry kind of continued on with the script. And I remember reading your book, and at those screenings, if you like, for each reel, you kind of talk to them about suggestions and ideas discussed at that time. Can you tell us some of the maybe some background information on some of the significant changes that were discussed and confirmed at the time that you were showing each reel of the first cut? Was there anything that they didn't like or wanted to add more of or left out? Or?
Actually, the process was to show the picture twice.
Mm-hmm.
We showed the whole picture to the group in the morning, and nobody took any notes, just watched. And then broke for lunch. After lunch, we came back and watched it a second time, during which people took notes. And then the next day, we went to the editing room and went through the film and ran the film on the cam. And whenever someone had a note, I would stop and we would discuss it. And George would make the decision whether to do the note or not. And in my recollection, everything that Hirsch wanted, George said to do. He okayed everything that Hirsch wanted to do. So I don't remember the specific notes, but that was the process.
Got it. And so, it would be remiss of me to not mention, the that very famous, iconic, even to this day, children of all ages, watch The Empire Strikes Back, and the jaws drop with the "I am your father" scene, as you're very well aware of. So, at that time, were you given like several versions of that scene that you were required to cut and edit, or were you just told this is the scene that we're going to run with, and you just kept that? So, how did that work out?
Well, that scene was shot on a soundstage with an enormous wind machine. If you'll recall, Vader's cape is blowing the whole time.
Road City.
Those wind machines were powered by, I think they were Volkswagen engines attached to a big blade, and they made so much noise that the production mixer was unable to record even a guide track of what the actors were saying. So we had to loop all the lines in that scene. Now with Vader, it's very easy. Can't see his mouth, it's very, very convenient to have. You don't have to worry about lip sync when somebody's masked, But it's funny. I think in the original, on the set, I think he was told to say, "Obi-Wan killed your father." I don't remember. It's funny. You would think something this of this magnitude would have made more of a dent in my memory, but I don't know. Recently I went back and looked at the script, and what did it say in the script? So I looked in the script, and that page is missing. So I guess George knew all along what he was going to do, and we found out, in post. And I remember, oh, real, wow, where did they find that out? But I was more concerned with trying to get the loops to, especially for Mark, who was a big emotional scene for him, and to loop that was really a struggle. We had to do it without a guide track. So I was more concerned with the mechanics and the difficulties of the circumstances than I was about the substance of the scene.
Yeah. I remember reading your book again, which we'll talk about in a second. Some of the very, I think, we Star Wars movies are synonymous with, creating some technology to get to an end result, to make a shot or a scene or an effect look the way it should. But I remember reading your book, and that scene on Bespin where Vader is in that kind of like room, and Han and Chewie and Princess Leia walk in, and he draws the blaster out of Han Solo's hand. Now I know you employed some really clever technology to do that scene, because it looks like Vader pulls the blaster out of Han's hand with the Force. Tell us a little bit about that scene and how you created that.
Yeah, well, the effect of Vader capturing Han's blaster was composed of 3 shots. One was, let me see. So Han is holding his blaster like this. The tip of the gun that's at the end of frame, and what the audience doesn't see is that there's a wire attached to the tip. So on cue, somebody out of frame yanks the blaster and it goes flying out of his hand. So that was easy, And then the second shot is the gun flying through the air, and that was just one grip tossing the gun and the camera operator following the action like that. And then the third shot, they had figured out that they would shoot the film backwards, and they were trying to reconstruct what it would look like for Vader to catch the gun. So he was supposed to bring his hand up and then and move it, and let me see. So it would be this way. He'd move his hand up and go like that. So when he played it backwards, it would go like that, and he would bring it down. So they were trying to figure out what the movement was and everything. And I happened to be visiting the set, and I said, "Why don't you just toss it to him?" He says, "Well, he can't see. He's got the mask on and everything." And David Prowse says, "Try it. Let me try it." So they put somebody just out of frame, and they tossed him the gun, and he caught it, and that was it. So we didn't have to run the film backwards or anything.
Simple tricks.
Well,
That's all it takes. Simple tricks. But what a great scene and a great effect that you achieved. That
context is everything.
Absolutely. So, Paul, before we take some final questions from me, before we take some questions from our members, I'm sure and it's not for me to say, but the highs and lows of working in this industry can be quite profound, right? 1 minute it's fantastic, everything's going well, and I remember reading in your book, in 1981, when the Academy Award nominations came out, you were surprised at the lack of nominations for The Empire Strikes Back. I think we all were at that time. And with the movie only winning 1 for sound, any thoughts about why that might have occurred? Why doing so well in the original Academy Awards, and then in 1981 largely being ignored. Any thoughts on that? Why that might have happened, or why the feeling of not being nominated was such?
Well, I was certainly disappointed. One of my hopes for Empire Strikes Back was to demonstrate. I guess this sounds immodest to say it, but I'll say it anyway, because who cares at this point? I wanted to demonstrate.
With friends.
Sorry?
You're with friends. You're okay. You can speak your mind.
Yeah, right. 31,000 friends. I wanted to demonstrate to the world and to myself, really, that had I been given the opportunity to do the first film by myself, I could have handled it, So I was that was kind of what I was trying to prove with Empire. But I guess the Academy thought, well, they've already done it. We're not going to give them another award for the same work. I mean, it's basically the same picture. I guess they thought. I don't know what they thought. It's hard to know.
Yeah.
But it was it was humbling, and it's a good experience to be reminded every once in a while that you're not the most important person in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there were certainly some worthy winners that year, and some great editing jobs. I remember Elephant Man being one of the movies that won really well. But yeah, I mean, look, I think we're biased as Star Wars fans. I know you were involved in the movie making, and you I think you famously quoted that these movies brought the child out in all of us, and I think we all as fans of this the Star Wars franchise recognize Empire Strikes Back as being the best movie out of all of them that was shot and edited.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? I mean, people don't really remember the awards. I mean, they remember the work.
Right. Very true.
I mean, I don't even remember who won that year, but I guess it was Raging Bull, wasn't it?
Yeah, Raging Bull. I think Elephant Man.
That certainly deserved it.
Yeah.
But if people remember the work, if you remember the picture, that's reward enough for me.
Right. Absolutely. So before we go on to one last, I think, question for me more than anything, before we go on to allow our members to ask some questions to, talk about your experience with working on the movies. So it would be remiss of me not to mention your book. Your book is an incredible personal memoir, if you like, of your time, not just with Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, but all the movies you work on. It is an incredible book. I read it last year during the pandemic, and I just really connected with it. Your it's an incredible tale of, it's not one of those typical books about, this is what it was like to make a movie. It was more of a personal tale about your experiences, both personally, professionally, some of the friendships you made, some of the tough parts of working in the movie business. And, I would utterly recommend all of our members to purchase, if you haven't already, a copy of Paul's book. It's called, and I'll share it on screen, a long time ago in a cutting room far, far and away. It's 50 years of editing Hollywood hits. Paul's tale, if you like, his memoirs, is incredible. I don't think I've ever read a book like this, and I think it's just an incredible piece of work, and it's a great testament to your life. And I think it's well written, and I hope you write some more. Honestly, I think it's well written, and I know it's available for sale. I actually have the hard book, the hard copy edition. You can have it in audio version. It's on Kindle.
Thank you very much. I hasten to add that I did not intend this to be a how-to book. I always thought that editing textbooks were very boring, and I didn't want to write a boring book. My aim in writing the book was not to educate about editing, but to entertain people with some stories I thought were pretty good stories. I heard back from readers that they found the book educational, which surprised me because I hadn't intended it to be. But I suppose that in describing some of the things, I think I was fairly candid in describing things that I learned by some of the mistakes I made, and or just learned for the first time the things that I hadn't known. So I suppose you can learn from that. But again, my intention was to write an entertaining book, and I've been telling these stories on various movie sets for decades, and I thought I should really write these down because I was getting good reactions. I mean, when we tell these stories and people say, "Oh, that's a really great story," and so I thought I should write these down because I like telling stories, and
it does just that. It's like I say, I fully endorse this book. One of the great things that I like about, apart from being a personal memoir, you have testimonials from, J.J. Abrams, Taylor Hackford, Walter Murch, and Mark Hamill. They all say what a wonderful written piece of work this is. It's not one of those typical books. It really gets into the nitty gritty and the bits and pieces of your experience. And it's like you say, it's not a how-to book. It's more of a personal memoir. And one of the things my last question before we take questions from our members is, again, it talks about your experience in working with writers, directors, producers, cinematographers, etc. So one of the things I really picked up on in the book is, you describe the task of editing as a mental discipline, as being given, I think the analogy is a big box with lots of parts that you need to kind of fumble through to create a gizmo, right? To get an end goal, an end result. But to do that, you have to sift through, both the junk and the useful parts in the box to create something meaningful. So what's the secret of doing that? You've got this big box, stuff that you think might be useful, might not be so useful. How do you jumble through that to create something meaningful?
Well, there is a goal in mind. That's the screenplay has given you the target, what you're going for, and you just follow your instinct as to what will help you reach your goal. And Michelangelo said, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't know the exact language, but something along the lines of beauty is found in the purgation of the irrelevant. So you have to decide what's relevant and what's not. And the unnecessary, I forget what his words were, but essentially it was that old thing about, you take a block of marble and you cut away everything that doesn't look like David, so it's sort of like that. You follow your instinct. I'm not comparing myself to Michelangelo, please, no letters. No, it's just that you follow your instinct in trying to achieve what you understand the goal to be.
Absolutely, that makes total sense. And I think it's shown that you have that natural ability, and you've learned lessons, as you say, from mistakes, and you just have that natural instinct and ability to draw upon what what your gut feeling to get to something that you feel is what you want to achieve is remarkable, and just so such a creative instinct that you have
Well, it's
within
not
yourself.
it's not unique to me. I mean, there are a lot of very talented editors around, and I think they've all succeeded by following their instincts. If I tell young editors, they want advice, and I say, follow your instinct. If you have good instincts, you'll go far. If you don't have good instincts, maybe you should look for a different line of work.
Yeah, and what I love about your career, apart from your work in editing, is I know that you've lectured. I work in higher education at Stanford University, and I know you've lectured as well at USC, and given back your experience, and the lessons that you've learned and the experiences you picked up to younger, cinematographers, editors, etc. So, I can't thank you enough for doing that. So, Paul, we're going to turn this over to David. David has been receiving some questions from our very large member base out there. I'm sure that David's got some choice questions for you. So I'll hand it over to David for the next few minutes.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you, sir. Just
So
a few
David,
questions.
you've narrowed it down to one question?
Just a few more than one, but many of our members are expressing that
Oh, look at the time.
you've been so thorough, and you have they expressed the awe of the stories that you're telling, and it doesn't leave them with very many questions. One of the few would be that are you able to watch movies today without an editor's eye, or is it really hard for you to separate that and enjoy movies personally?
No, I think I know too much. I mean, I'll be watching a movie and I think, oh, that's the stunt man. Or, they cut there, that must be, oh, that's the stunt guy. And, oh, this is VFX. They didn't shoot that. Or things like that. I mean, they intrude. Or look at this. I don't know how I just saw an Edgar Wright movie last night in Soho. There's a dance sequence in the beginning where this dancer is spinning this woman around, and it's a continuous shot where the dancer is never out of frame. The woman goes in and out of frame, and she goes out of frame, and she comes back, and it's a different actress, deliberately. And he spins her around, and then another actress comes in, and I thought, how do they do that? So knowing a bit about production does, sort of have it prompts a kind of a meta response in me. I think I'm not just watching the movie and I think, how do they do that? Or I saw what film did I see recently? Oh, there's a 1964 version of War and Peace that was done in the Soviet Union. I think it was directed by Sergei Bondarchuk, I think was his name. And it could only have been done in the Soviet Union because the production is so massive. It's just eye-popping to see these battle scenes. They would have a big wide shot, and you would see off into the distance, literally for miles, and the ground would be filled with soldiers in costume and explosions going off and cannon firing and horses and it's all in one shot, and you're thinking to yourself, how many costumers did they have, and how many makeup people did they have? Because people are walking by camera, streaming blood, and they have, they have soot on their faces from the battle, and their costumes are torn, and there are horses galloping by, and troops marching in formation carrying rifles, and to put all this together, and they're out in the countryside somewhere, and they have to break for lunch after a shot, and they have to feed all these people, and they, so that all these thoughts about the production itself sort of, I can't just watch the movie and not think all those things.
Uh, it's a shame, but it's a thing, and it's obviously a talent that has brought you much success. Another quick question, as I won't keep you very long,
No,
is how do you, or do you have to get in a different frame of mind to edit a picture so vastly different as Star Wars or Empire, as opposed to Ferris Bueller's Day Off or Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, which is a completely different style of picture, at least to us. Is it to you when you're editing it?
Well, it's like dancing. They when I was a kid, they would teach ballroom dancing in elementary school, and you learned, you know, foxtrot or cha-cha-cha or a waltz, or and you'd listen to the music and you try to figure out, oh, this is dun 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 dun, it's a cha-cha-cha, so editing is sort of like that. You look at the film and you think, oh, what's the intention here? And you say, oh, so I'm going to do this. This is meant to be funny. I'll just try to make this as funny as possible. And it's not really, I think that any good editor can cut any genre of film, although it's very common for editors to get typecast in a sense. I was lucky to escape that. I think that a good editor can cut anything, although with one exception. I discovered that to cut comedy, you have to have a sense of humor, and some people don't have a sense of humor. So that's the only exception, but otherwise, a good editor can cut anything.
And last question is, it's the perennial one, and if you don't want to answer or can't answer this one, feel free. It's the which cut is your favorite? Which one of your children, which one of your babies is your favorite? Either most enjoyable to do, or just, I don't know if there is an answer for that.
We could take bets on this right now.
Well, I have a number of favorites.
I would say Secret of My Success.
Yeah? Why?
I think that's a very underrated movie.
Yeah, well, it was, about that picture, that was, Secret of My Success was #1 at the box office for 5 weeks in a row. And I don't think any picture I've done since then has ever done that. And I don't think, I question this, and maybe, I think you'd have to go to Titanic to find another picture that stayed on top for weeks on end. Absolutely. But Success was very underrated. I agree. But it
Absolutely.
wasn't. Sorry?
I love that movie. I mean, if you want to get the essence of the 80s, what else is there but that?
So I have a personal story to tell you about that movie, but I'll do it off camera. I'll tell you afterwards, Paul.
All right. But, Obsession is very meaningful to me because it was the last picture I did with Bernard Herrmann the year he died. And we had become close friends. So that's very special to me. And Ray is very special to me because I really, it was my first time working really with the media composer where I felt I could do things that I hadn't dared try before on film because I could actually see the result of what I had intended without sending it off to an optical house and waiting 3 days to get it back and find out they'd done it wrong, So, but some of the multiple images that I did and some of the supers and I felt for the first time I was not only editing the film, but I was like reaching into the image and editing that within the. So that was sort of a special experience. And of course, I got nominated, and it was my first film with Taylor Hackford, who's become a friend. So that's very meaningful for me. And of course, the Star Wars movies and the John Hughes pictures and the Mission Impossible pictures. I mean, I worked with Tom Cruise in a number of films, and So I have a lot of favorites.
Yeah. So thanks for that, Paul. So just before we wrap up proceedings, again, I just want to say, if you've enjoyed this evening's conversation, please, as an early Christmas present, buy Paul's book. It's available on Amazon in various formats. It is an incredible book. I highly recommend it. And as Paul's just said, Taylor Hackford, who he worked with, has actually written a personal testimony for this specific book. So go read it.
If you like the book, please post a positive review. I understand that helps.
Yeah.
At least one of our members has already posted that they have downloaded their copy of the book. They've ordered and downloaded it while we were watching.
That's wonderful. So with that, Paul, before we wrap up, one thing I do want to mention, and because I'm running this specific speaker series, I just want to shout out and congratulations to your son, Eric Hirsch, for his work on The Queen's Gambit and for being nominated and for winning 2 Emmys for outstanding sound editing and sound mixing. That was an incredible series. I think a lot of people across the world love that series, and I'm sure you're proud of Eric's work on that. And the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. You've entertained us over many, many years with all the productions and movie releases you've worked on. Growing up as a teenager into my 20s and 30s, your work has really brought a lot of joy and happiness to a lot of us all over the world. So thank you for doing that. And it's been a great pleasure to talk to you this evening, and a great thrill as well for me personally.
Oh, thank you very much.
Okay, with that being said, David, I just want to turn it over to you for a second just to talk about what's next for our virtual Cantina series.
Thank you, sir. Well, as you'd mentioned earlier, this is our grand finale of the speaker series for the fall of 2021. Had a lot of awesome content, and if you've missed any of it or if you've missed any portions of tonight, you can catch up on all of those on our speaker series playlist on our YouTube channel, www.youtube.com/the Virtual Cantina Network. Catch up on all of those there. And join us tomorrow night. This has been a super full week. We had an episode last night, an episode tonight, and tomorrow night, as a part of the countdown to the Book of Boba Fett releasing at the end of the year, we will be watching Return of the Jedi with special guest Kevin Thompson, who will be telling us stories from the set and the production of that. So please join us again tomorrow. And thank you all for watching. Thank you, Mr. Hirsch. And many of the viewers are thanking you right now in the chat, and we appreciate you being with us.
Yeah. So that being said, Paul Hirsch, American cinema editor, Academy Award winner, editor of a lot of our favorite movies of all time. Thank you very much for joining this evening. Thank you for your time, and may the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you.
Thank you.